And one of the really interesting things you said was that you were a bad kid, which, if you were to have asked me before before you said that, I would imagine that you were a wonderful kid who loved school and things like that. So, what's the story? What is it? What did you mean by that? Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quantopian show. I have an amazing guest this week, Jason Strimpel, who is the author behind Piquant News. And normally I do like a little biographical summary for people. Yours is quite complicated, and so I think we may need to pick through it. I think the overriding theme when I was thinking about your background is you're like a massive multitasker. Like you're just doing a lot of things at once all the time.
Yeah.
So currently, I think probably the highest profile things you're doing are Piquant News, and you're working at AWS, which sounds like a very cool job. And I would love just to start by asking about the origin story for Piquant News. Like it's about 2 years old now, coming up on 2 years, a little
Uh,
less.
it depends. Maybe I can
Okay.
explain what that means. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here, Foss. I've been a huge fanboy of Quantopian. Like, I think I was member ID 100 or under 1,000 or something like
If
that.
you know your member ID, that's a sign that you've been in for a long time.
Yeah, and just like the fact that you brought Python and quant finance to the world, I still owe a huge debt of gratitude for all the work that you and your team had done. So hats off to you, and it's an absolute pleasure to be sitting in front of you today.
Likewise.
Origin story of PyQuant News. So back in like 2015, I realized that I had like hundreds of bookmarks for interesting links, things that I was researching in the quant space. I had finished up a master's in quantitative finance, and I realized that I'm just kind of a builder, and I wanted to expose this stuff out to the world. So I built a very simple WordPress website, and I started just posting links of interesting things that I found and like 2 sentence blurb every couple weeks, right? And I had just hooked it up to Twitter, just because that's what you do. And over time, like 7 years, I was doing this between 2015 and maybe 2022, just out of sheer habit. Every couple months, maybe I'd skip 6 months, but I was doing this. And in early 2022, I literally opened up Twitter and I'm like, oh, wow, I have 4,000 followers on Twitter. This is like mid 2022. And I'm like, maybe I can do something with this. And I started putting some energy and effort into talking about quant finance using Python, and the account just blew up. And that's just signal, obviously, that there's people that are interested in what you had to say. And I kind of took the approach of making it very accessible. So kind of like Quantopian had done, where you were taking very complicated topics, you're breaking them down. I was doing something similar, but just making it very simple language. So like, what is value at risk? What is it in layman's terms? And from there, it was kind of off to the races. So like, I started it technically in 2015, but it actually started to do something in its kind of current form in probably mid 2022.
Interesting. What happened in 22 that you kind of switched? Because I think now people know you for the weekly newsletter, which if you're not a subscriber, definitely subscribe, because it's a weekly, I would say, like deep dive into a real piece of code that does a real function
Yeah.
that's actually practical and usable. I think a lot of the stuff that you do week to week, people could deploy like the following week
Mhm.
into their strategies. How did you get started on that? Like, how did you figure out that that's what the people wanted?
It's again another long story. I'll try to make it super concise. But early 2022, I had joined AWS, and there's a huge culture of writing at AWS.
Mm.
So I started to take some writing courses, and I took one thinking that it was like how to write business writing, but it was actually like basically how to write on social media. And for whatever reason, it just totally clicked with me. And the whole concept of using social media as a way to get signal into what people might be interested in as a product, I kind of took that to the next level and started to really focus on, doing Twitter the right way, doing LinkedIn the right way. And I launched an ebook that was quite successful that described how to price options with Python. There's like an $8 ebook. I did like 6 sales my first day, and I was like, oh,
Yeah, this is gonna be huge.
it's going to be huge. And then kind of the natural progression was a newsletter. I had all this, I mean, all these books are all from my master's degree. So I had all this like pent up stuff that I just felt like sharing with the world. And I wrote a couple newsletter articles, had really, really great response, and took it from there. And that was kind of the evolution. And then at the end of 2022, I launched the course.
Okay.
Which maybe we can get into later.
I want to get into the course, but I love writing, and I really admire people that can be consistent with writing, because it's even if you really enjoy it, it's just hard, right? It's hard to have an idea. Can you go back to the course? I think that's so interesting. Was that a course at Amazon, or you found a course at a university or something? Like, tell us more about the course.
The course is called Ship 30 for 30. And it's done by a couple guys who, one of them is a copywriter, another one is kind of the business angle. But it's a very popular online course that basically teaches people how to write in the digital world, right? Digital writing is how they kind of frame it. And it's ultimately like how to write the right way on social media. So obviously Twitter, it's 280 characters. You have to be super concise. You've got to hook people into reading what you want. LinkedIn has its own kind of nuance. And it's really about how to write headlines and all the copywriting stuff kind of condensed in a way that you can apply to social and to kind of online writing, like very short form. So John, you do stuff that's very long form. So it's kind of the other end of the spectrum there. And again, for whatever reason, it just like hooked me. It fit my personality. I think it's that, like you said, I'm doing a lot of things. It's like that shiny ball, like you always have something to capture your attention, and it just captured mine, and I used those skills that I had taken to kind of apply that to the quantitative finance side of things, which I think was an interesting intersection, but it works for the audience because they can kind of parse and understand what I'm trying to explain.
Awesome. Yeah, I think for me personally, there's no deeper writer's block than a tweet. Like the thought of writing a tweet, I like block up. It's easier for me if I ever write a tweet, I'll write like 3 pages and then like write a 2-sentence summary of the 3 pages.
It's so funny.
Yeah, it's amazing how hard it is. You're
right, man. It's a very particular skill, and kind of at Amazon, it's the same idea. You don't have the luxury of a group of executives' attention for an hour.
Right.
And we don't communicate via slides at Amazon. Everything is a 6-page narrative, and everything you read and everything you hear about the writing culture at Amazon and the way we communicate ideas is absolutely 100% true. So you've got to get very concise, very quickly, get right to the point, and it's very unnatural. Yeah. And it's hard to do, but it's something that it's like a learned practice.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. I can see getting better at it with practice. Actually, I have a question about the 6-page narrative. I've always wondered.
Yeah.
So every time I hear narrative form, I love it, right? That's my favorite form of writing. But I also think of it as like a hugely biased way of thinking, right? We all have a narrative bias. We all want to fit things into a compelling story. Mm-hmm. We want a beginning, we want a middle, we want an end, we want a hero, we want a villain. So one thing I've always wondered, obviously it works, right? It's incredibly effective for Amazon. Is it surprising to you that like all these people at Amazon crafting ideas into narratives does not result in bias in the outcomes, or doesn't create sort of like false starts? I find it surprising.
It's a good question. I think there's 2 things that I want to preface the answer, and then I'll give you the answer. The preface is that when we say narrative, it's not necessarily like narrative format that you might be describing. We just call it narrative as like the form of document, so that internally it's like the lingua franca, right? So we have a PRFAQ, we have a 2-pager, we have an operating document, we have a 3-year plan, etc. But that's a super interesting question, and I think we have some mechanisms along with that writing process that do a good job of flushing most of that out. And we collect a lot of feedback. So I'm in the process of writing a document, and I've probably had feedback from 25 people.
Okay.
I've spent hours on doc reads where you literally sit in silence for 20 minutes and read the document, and then people critique the document. And everything is data driven. So if you don't have data to support an assertion, you will be called out on that. If you are using weasel words, like we say, like um, extremely big or extremely X, like the word extremely gives you no additional information, and it could be construed as bias, right? Because you're making something seem big, but it's not actually quantifiable. And you have experienced doc writer. So I'm a doc bar raiser at Amazon. And what that means is that I have gone through enough docs to become in the club of people who can write and read and critique documents well, air quote. So you've got these people that will literally shred your document to pieces if you're not following and adhering this kind of unbiased perspective. And I think that does a really pretty good job. Now, the more skilled you get, the more you can position things, leave stuff out, add stuff to kind of make your point.
Yeah.
But again, I think like the big chunky decisions, I think Adam Slipsky just announced a $15 billion investment in Japan. You got to believe that the 6-page narrative that explained why $15 billion investment in Japan is worthy has gone through a lot of scrutiny.
Yeah.
So I think the bigger the decision, the more scrutiny the doc goes, and it washes out a lot of that bias.
That's super interesting. Would you say that it's like company culture that is washing the bias out, or is it process? Or maybe those are almost indistinguishable.
It's a good question. It's probably when you come into Amazon, you get kind of, I'm going to say brainwashed. You get brainwashed in our culture, right? You get indoctrinated in our culture. And a lot of our culture is inclusion, taking rid of bias, being very clear in your thought process, very clear in your decision making, and writing goes along with that. There's an inordinate amount of training on how to write in an Amazonian way. So I think you're like primed to be a writer that avoids bias. And then on top of that priming, you have the mechanisms and the audit and the feedback processes that kind of wash out any remaining bias for the most part. So it's kind of a combination, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Fascinating. Is $15 billion bet, is that like the record of like dollars per page? Or maybe
Well,
not.
AWS started as a 6-page narrative. Andy Jassy, who is now the CEO of Amazon, wrote allegedly legendary kind of thing, which was the 6-page narrative that described Amazon Web Services. That might be the best bet per page.
That might be the current record holder.
Yeah.
Is there like an archive? You read these things? Like, can you go back and read the ancient 6 pages?
No, like I would have loved to read the 6-pager on like S3 and some of the services, right? Now I've seen a couple, like part of the doc bar raiser process is that we have a queue and you can ask for a doc bar raiser to read and review your doc.
Okay.
And so I've seen a couple that allude to services that might be announced or coming up, which is kind of cool to see because they go up through like Slipsky and things like that. But I don't know that you can go access like the original doc that described AWS, which I would love to see. That'd be super cool.
Yeah, that should be like in the Smithsonian's National.
Yeah.
I find it fascinating that so much of your full-time job, or full-time's not a good way of qualifying it. Like I don't know, how do you categorize these two things? Because from the outside, I mean, I guess from the outside looking at the Piquant newsletter, I think, well, I would need like 30 hours a week to produce that. I don't think that's true for you. I think you're a much faster writer. But yeah, how do you describe all the things that you're doing when people ask you inevitably, what do you do? What do you say?
I don't. I just say I'm a project manager at Amazon. That's it. It's kind of an empathy thing, right? Like I should be more empathetic to people because they actually probably have an interest in some of the stuff I'm working on, but I'm kind of lazy to describe like the 5 things I'm working on. If people press, then I'll just call it a side project, which I think it still is. As an aside, like I get up at 4 a.m. to write, and those weekly newsletters, I've gotten it down to probably 2 hours a week.
Okay.
And a week's worth of content on social media is probably another hour and a half of effort. So it's a pretty finely oiled system at this point. But like if I go away for a day or 2 days, then the whole thing breaks, and it takes me like 2 weeks to
Have you
2 weeks to get
recovered
back.
from? I think you took a little break recently, right? You went on a
Yeah,
trip. Yeah. Have you gotten back into the zone?
finally. Yeah, this week we had so Monday was obviously a bank holiday, is MLK, and then Tuesday the weather in Colorado where I live was such that the kids didn't have school, so it kind of threw me off a little bit. But
Riding,
I'm
making
the
making pancakes for the kids.
Yeah, I mean, because you get up at 4, it takes you half an hour to kind of like get your brain awake, and then I kind of spend 15 minutes like clicking around just to get my brain really awake. So I
Yeah.
probably have like an hour to an hour and a half in the morning before the kids get up to like actually do some writing. The kids get up at 6:30 ish, and then it's the morning thing, and then it's
Um,
the AWS day job from like 8 a.m. till whenever.
and do you like? Do you if you miss your 4 a.m. wake up call? I don't know if that happens. Are you like cranky for the rest of the day because you didn't get your writing done, or like what's the?
I get I'm cranky anyway because 4 a.m. is early.
Yeah.
So I'm always a little bit cranky, unfortunately. That's only partially a joke, but I get little like when the kids come in and they wake up for whatever reason like 5:45,
Yeah.
and you're like in the zone,
Yeah.
and then
That's
you've got like
tough.
a 5-year-old standing there looking at you. You're like, oh, this is my only time. This is my personal
Yeah.
time. That kind
Yeah.
of makes me a bit cranky, but
That
I
is
mean,
sort of like peak, I think, like parental stress because it's hard to get into the state of flow and it's so precious. And then, like your top priority pops into the room and you're
yep.
like, I got to give this up. I have to let go of this feeling. It's very hard.
Yep. And I mean, as you know, having run a business for a long time and having kids, like the time is the most precious resource that one has, right? And especially when you're trying to do a lot of things and you see all these opportunities and you're trying to get after them, like the ability to say no to stuff is so critical, and which I'm still learning at 42 years old how to say no to stuff. But you're
I
right.
fail at that every day.
Yeah. But there's one thing you cannot say no to, which is your family and your kids, right? So it does kind of pop the bubble and put you off, but it's just part of the game. You just have to accept
Also,
that this is
yeah, I
part of it.
mean, side of it's also like the greatest thing ever. Like once you make that transition and you're focused on your kids and you're like making
Yeah.
pancakes, you're
Yeah.
or whatever. It's amazing. I'm kind of a few years ahead of you kid wise, and my oldest is now just turned 16. So we're
Wow.
like driving, and
Wow.
he's going to be going to college, and just like that, you're like, oh man, I only have a couple of years where I'm gonna see him every single day.
Yeah. And you're
And
their whole world, right?
yeah.
Maybe not at 16, but like at 5. My kid's 5, right?
Oh
So
yeah, when you're in that zone, you're like a superhero. It's amazing.
yeah.
Yeah. 16, the myth has worn off.
Yeah.
They know that you're a human. Um,
Yeah.
but you get rewarded in other ways. So
Yeah.
um, so that was another thing I wanted to ask, when I was talking about your background, like, even, if hopefully people will go check out your LinkedIn because it's super interesting. A lot of like traditional trading experience, and then you've got a bunch of like startup and venture stuff and a lot of overlapping, really meaty endeavors.
Yeah.
And so I consider myself like the world's worst multitasker.
Yeah.
Like, even if I'm doing multiple things, I'm never actually doing more than one thing at a time. Like my brain just like won't let me.
Yeah.
And so I have to serialize everything. So I'm just like, how does your brain work that you're able to be doing like even just like you're describing like your day with like the newsletter and then work. Like I really have to keep my Quantopian time like to a minimum because if I go too far, then I'm like thinking about it all day and it's hard for me to do other stuff.
Mhm.
So how do you like make the transitions between these things while you're doing again like big endeavors simultaneously?
That's a good question. I'm also a serial kind of person. Like, I'm not doing two things at once, right? And but at the same time, I think one of my superpowers is just process stuff fast.
Okay.
So, like when I have an idea for a newsletter, I mean, the one I cranked out today on a brand new library I've never seen before probably took an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So I think like I've
For
got,
listeners, that's really, really fast.
yeah, it's pretty
Okay.
fast. Like you write the code, and maybe an hour and a half is a little bit light, maybe 2 hours, but at the
If
same
it's
time,
measured, if it's like O of hours and not O of days,
yeah,
like I
in
think
good
that's
shape.
yeah.
But I'm not writing like very long form stuff like you, right? So you're writing very long form stuff. And if you've been writing for a long time, it's still hard, but like you can get through it in a proportional amount of time to like the
Yeah,
length of the writing. So I've been writing code for, I mean, 20 plus years. I've been writing
yeah,
Python code for 12 years. So I don't get stuck on bugs. I don't get stuck on how to do a thing, right? Like that stuff goes very, very quickly to me, for example. And then on the newsletter, it's just describing the code, which is something I've been doing for a very long time as well. So I think it's like just leveraging some of that experience. But to answer your question, I think it's just compartmentalizing, which is a superpower of mine as well. So like I can kind of work on a thing in a very deep way for 2 solid hours, turn that part off, and then move on to something else and work on that very deeply for a concerted amount of time. So like some people get into flow. Maybe John, for you, it's writing. For me, it's like writing code. So I can
yeah,
go on for 6 hours, 4 hours writing code without even like getting up, which is probably not healthy, but it's just, the way I'm built.
yeah,
So I think there's like an element of compartmentalization. And then there's just like the compounding effect of doing the same thing every day for a
yeah,
very long time.
yeah,
So like the whole Quant news thing, it's been born and evolved just because I do the exact same thing every single day. And I'm okay with that boring monotony of writing a newsletter or writing social media content every single day. And then you just start to roll and build on that stuff, right? Now, that's a little different than like building a startup. That is obviously very different. And then in that case, like the couple times I've done the startup thing while doing the full-time job, that's a nights and weekend situation. And that's
okay,
leveraging people around me and leveraging my partners and the co-founders and things to like be very efficient with each other's times, identify what we're good at, and just focus right on that and not get distracted by stuff that you're not good at or you shouldn't be doing. And again, as a the business owner of Quantopian for so long, you can probably attest like the shiny balls are everywhere, but you got to be really ruthless about what makes the most impact right now. And I think I've
yeah,
learned that skill as well.
yeah, yeah. The thing you said about just like consistency and steady compounding, even at like a low rate,
Mhm.
not that necessarily you've had high growth, but that steady compounding, it's amazing
It
how
is.
powerful that is. If you can
It
just
is.
grind it out every day.
And if you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable, again, another superpower. Like
Yeah,
I can be uncomfortable for a very long time and be okay with that. And again, I'm going to go back to you. Like you're the startup founder. I'm sure there's been long stretches of time where things were very uncomfortable. But if you can learn how to deal in that uncomfortability and deal in the ambiguity, again, it's a superpower and it's a learned skill. But that and combined with this like ability to compartmentalize with that compounding effect of doing the same thing every day, you can get a lot done,
yeah,
uh, and a
absolutely.
lot of big things.
A lot of big things. I think the other thing that's cool is in that, especially like slow compounding effect, if you're consistent, you reach like a break-even point where the thing that you're compounding starts paying you back more
Hmm.
than even maybe your effort is paying going in.
Hmm.
And that's like an amazing feeling to reach, if your audience is kind of self-sustaining. I really vividly remember this from Quantopian where the community became self-sustaining. We
Yeah,
had like poured effort into building the software and kind of priming it with content. And then there's a lot of important like behavior modeling you have to do when you're starting a
hmm,
community. It's sort of like parenting. Like you want to show people like what this community is for and what the proper way to act is. And that can be anything like proper, for Wall Street bets is one thing, proper for like the Quantopian forums is very different. Um, but it takes a huge amount of effort and focus. And I vividly remember like the morning I got up and for like a probably 6 month period, it was like get up, post something on the forums, wait for questions
hmm.
and answer every question that came up. And I remember like waking up, going down to check the forums, and like someone was already answering questions. And they didn't work at the company. It was like a community member.
Yeah,
It was just so automatic after that. Like it really really just took on a life of its own. So it's amazing when and I think this is true for like your social accounts and the content that you're creating, I think is either past or at that tipping point where it's like a self-sustaining community around it. It's really cool.
It feels like that. And then as a writer yourself, you know that you create a library of content and you can reshape it, reuse it for different ways. So I think I'm on my 78th weekly newsletter. That's a library of content
Yeah.
and you and I have talked about it, and I'm sure still trying to figure out how that's going to work, but and
Yeah.
wherever that lands, I don't know, but that's an asset that you can continue to leverage and use and reshape and present in different ways for a long time. And I think you're right. Like there's that boulder that you finally kind of get over the hill, and then
Yep.
it starts to roll downhill, and then you just kind of jump along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, have you seen I forget the name of it. There's a movie about freediving.
Yeah.
And
With the octopus,
no, actually, that's an amazing movie.
that is an amazing movie.
Speaking of being like comfortable with discomfort, that
Yeah,
dude is very comfortable with being uncomfortable.
it's a great movie.
That's an amazing movie. I will find out the title of that and put it in the comments section so that we can look it
Okay.
up and people can check it out. But there's another one about freediving. Amazing movie, and it follows a couple different divers. But this one woman is talking about the experience, and there's a point when you're diving where the buoyancy, because of the pressure, the buoyancy of your body, is reduced, and you actually start to sink, and
Oh
so you
wow.
start flying downward, and that's how records are broken. Like that's like, but you imagine like the mental toughness you have to
Oh
like
God.
gravity is now driving you deeper into the water. And what's amazing about the people that do things like that, just like unbelievable endurance athletes. And what she was describing, she was like, "This is my favorite part of free diving is when gravity starts dragging me down into the water." Um,
Wow.
and that feeling of momentum, I think, is amazing. Like anything like that, where you're trying to like achieve and push your limits and stuff like that. When the momentum takes over, it's kind of magical, even when you're
It's
going deep
incredible.
into the.
Yeah. Yeah. Talk about mental toughness. Geez, imagine
Yeah.
that. Just like it's like a nightmare, right? Somebody's grabbing your foot and pulling you down
Oh,
deeper into
yeah.
the
Yeah.
darkness.
Yeah. So the other thing I would love to hear about is, reading your newsletter. It's clear that, I mean, it's very clear you love coding, right? That's like overflowing passion. There's a lot of enthusiasm that comes through. Just like the sheer output, I think, speaks to that. But there's this other part of you really obviously love trading in the markets. And where did that come from? Like, what's the sort of origin of your passion for trading?
That's a great question. I mean, before we started recording, I was talking about the bull and bear, right?
Yeah.
So just for
Why don't
the
you tell that story? Because you can see the
yeah,
camera.
yeah. So there's a bull and a bear here, and obviously that's kind of the symbolism of Wall Street. The bull market goes up, the bear market goes down. And my grandfather, my mother's father, was a stock market person. He was an engineer, but he was an investor in the stock market. Legend has it he bought Microsoft at IPO. I don't know if that's true. It's what my mom says, but my mom says all sorts of crazy stuff that the believability factor it varies. But he had these things kind of cast in bronze, which you can't really get like these really high quality statuettes anymore. They just don't make it like they used to. So these are like very heavy, solid bronze, and he had these at his house. And I remember when I was a small kid, one of the only memories I have of my grandfather was him explaining this bull and bear concept to me and talking about the stock market. I don't think I like had any sort of enduring passion about investing when I was 5 years old. The first kind of conscious memory I have of the market when I was 16, one of my best friends, his father was a stockbroker and he drove a Cadillac. And I thought it was the coolest thing I've ever heard because my dad always talked about Cadillacs. My grandfather drove a Cadillac and this was like the luxury icon of the world.
Yeah.
I'm like, this dude drove a Cadillac. I'm like, wow, stocks, Cadillacs, ding, ding, ding. So that kind of sat. I think I traded my first stock either 16, 17 years old, very early. Like, do you remember Zecco?
Yeah.
Zecco. It was like one of
Yep.
the first free, of course, they're selling all your order flow to Citadel,
Yeah.
but it was like one of the first free brokerages. I like signed up for that. And again, for whatever reason, it just hooked my attention. And then as I got older, when I was 18, I kind of got plugged into programming. And when I was 18, this is like early 90s.
Yeah.
Like my dad had computers. I was always on computers. And I kind of wrote my first code. This is PHP. I connected to a database, a MySQL database, and my mind was like blown. I still
Wow.
remember like
Yeah.
printing out rows of a database on an HTML page, and it was like, and
That's a
so
pretty
stock,
cool first project, actually.
yeah, it's just like spin up a MySQL database, and obviously there was stuff before that, but like I got to that point
Yeah.
and just kind of pulled in some data from PHP, and whatever, for whatever reason, it just like tricked something in my head, and I've been hooked ever since then.
Yeah.
And kind of trading as well. I think I'm like always on a search for complexity. I think when I was a teenager, I was a bad kid, and I remember my parents always screaming at me about my potential. So I think like finding one of the most complex things that you could ever learn, which is like trading and technology,
Yeah.
was like my way of proving that I have potential. This is like what I've reasoned about, and so I've just always kind of been into the markets. Trading, I've been trading since I was 18 years old, sometimes professionally, sometimes not. And then like the leverage that you get on your skills and experience
Yeah.
with technology, especially today,
Yeah.
there's been no better time to be alive, literally, in this space, to be able to use the tools that we now have at our disposal for free. And our lifetimes, software became open source.
Yep.
Like that didn't exist before. And the ability to go download and use like some of the most powerful technology that humanity has ever seen for free, it's like it'd be a waste of a life not to go exploit it if you're into that kind of thing. And I am. So very passionate about it, obviously. And that intersection of technology and the markets is just a perfect use case and a perfect excuse to use all this cool technology every single day, because the market is an endless sea of data, an endless sea of complexity, an endless sea of different things to look and feel with. And I've had that passion ever since I started this stuff like a long time ago.
And was it immediate, like the connection between tech and trading? Like, did that take time, or was it just like an immediate? I have so many follow-up questions. Sorry.
Yeah,
Was that like an
that's cool.
immediate link in your mind?
I don't think so. I was doing when I was at university, I was doing the website. So I got a job doing the website for the university. So I was doing a lot of web development. I think in the early days is all about the web for me. I
Yeah.
loved doing web development. I mean, I was like the guy
You're kind
trying
of
to get
coming of age, right? Right when that was all happening, right?
exactly like how much time did you spend trying to get the CSS to look the same on Internet Explorer and Firefox? Like how many thousands of hours of my life did I do that? A lot.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't until I finished undergrad and kind of got into the real world and started messing around with like C and C++
Yeah.
and kind of fell into it. And then in my master's degree, I learned MATLAB and really got into it, the scientific computing space. When I got out on my master's, I'm like, I want a MATLAB license. Oh, it's $2,000.
Yeah.
No thanks. And I found Python, kind of fell into Python, and that was it. So the kind of combination of trading out of university, then falling in love with the markets completely, 100% completely, like head over heels. When I was like 22, getting that couple trading jobs up front, kind of getting into the markets, and then doing the master's degree. That's where it kind of solidified the technology space with the market space.
How did you figure out that you wanted to go do was it financial engineering, your degree, or quantum?
Financial engineering, yeah, specialty in trading and financial programming.
Okay. Um, so tons of people who will be watching this are thinking about finance, right? They're, probably, about to graduate or just out of school. Maybe they're thinking about going into big tech. Maybe they're thinking about going to finance. Some of them think about graduate school. I'm just curious, like looking back, are you glad you did the degree? How did you figure out you wanted to do it? Was it a 1 year program or two?
I did it part time, so it took me like 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah,
Obviously you did it while you're doing other things.
yeah, yeah. It's supposed to be a 2 year program. I was at JP Morgan during the time and
Okay.
during the financial crisis. So doing like 70-hour weeks, plus trying to do the master's degree, plus all the FINRA licensing. So that was a pretty intense experience. I think I figured out I wanted to do it because when I was trading, it started to dawn on me what I didn't know. Like you start to know what you don't know. You go in, you do the math test, you pass the math test, you can do fast math in your head. Great. here's a desk, here's your desk fees, here's your commissions, like go ahead, here's your 5 lot, go have fun. That was great. The firm blew up. And I'm like, wow, like that was an intense experience for a year and a half. Like I need to learn more about this. And I like structured education. So I went and did the thing and got the master's degree. In hindsight, the degree I did was very practical, which I
Yep.
think is key. So this was not a math finance. I got into University of Chicago in their math finance program. I am not particularly good at math, so I opted for the more practical degree, which was at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Like there were literally professors that were hedge fund traders during the day,
Yep.
and then they'd be associate professors at night. If you're thinking about it, you have to get a practical degree. You can't, not that you can't, right? But if you're going to go get a math finance degree, you're going to be a research person. Like you're probably not going to invent the next options pricing model. You're going to be sitting there doing putting together derivative products for customers, which if that's what you're into, that's cool. You'll be doing research, and if that's what you're into, that's cool too. But if you want to like get into the markets proper, get into the front office, actually trade, then you're probably going to want a more practical degree. If you can't program, then it's a non-starter. Like it's just table stakes. Excel doesn't do the job anymore. I tend to think Python is probably the best suited, most general, practical language you can know. There's other, Mojo is one, Rust is one. There's all these really powerful languages, but they're not as widely adopted as say Python. Okay. If you want to become like a systems developer, you want to like go build the front end systems. This is different than trading, right? This is a technology person that works for a trading company. This is not being a trader. That's C++, that's Java, right? You're working in the technology stack of the organization. Or you're like literally taking somebody's trading strategy and you're translating that to C or some compilable level language, okay? I know like Jane Street is an OCaml shop. So be conscious about what you want to do and then go find the programming language that supports what you want to do, okay? Python is great. It's very general, very practical. It's very general purpose. So if you go do Quant and you can't do Quant, you still know Python, and then you can go do bio, or you can do astrophysics, same programming language. In hindsight, I like to rag on my master's degree because they taught me MATLAB. They should have taught me Python. But for me, I think it was great because I learned a lot of the foundational practical things that you need to know, like probability distributions. Like, how do you think about probability in the market? Now, am I going and pricing swaptions? Am I pricing cap floors? Am I doing like Vasicek interest rate models or homogeneous interest rate jump models? I am not, which is what a whole slew of these books talk about. But I have now the like mental framework to go think about how the volatility evolves. And I trade options. So that's helpful for me, right? So if you can swing it, then I think getting a very practical master's degree is probably worth it. Plus, you have it on your CV, plus it's networking, plus you've proven that you're smart enough to do the work. Barring that, then what I like to tell people is that you got to get really obsessed with something very specific. So for me, it's like algorithmic trading is kind of my obsession. I wake up at 2 a.m. thinking about it. Get obsessed with something, do it every single day, and then go on the internet and talk about it. If you're on the internet every day for 3 years talking about your track record and how you can navigate the markets and make money, somebody's going to pick you up. Somebody's going to look at you and be like, this dude can trade. I don't care that he has a master's degree or not. Or this lady knows OCaml and she talks about it on the internet every single day. Jane Street is going to be looking for you. So I kind of digressed into some advice if you're in that position, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, the thing about the internet that I think is just incredible, I just continuously marvel at the internet's ability to connect people, like
Mm-hmm.
like-minded people, people with the same interests. And there's sort of explicit ways that it happens, and then sort of implicit, interesting, emergent ways that it happens.
Yeah,
But it is amazing how effective it is at bringing people together when they have the same interests.
that's how we connected.
Exactly.
Just
Totally.
through some weird third degree connection, we got invited to go do something in New York, and here we
Yep.
are. Yeah.
Yep. Um, I wanted to jump back because you said a bunch of things that were so interesting when we were talking about how you discovered trading and software. And one of the really interesting things you said was that you were a bad kid, which if you were to have asked me before before you said that, I would imagine that you were a wonderful kid who loved school and things like that. So what's the story? What is it? What did you mean by that?
Oh man. Well, I'm not ashamed about it, but I was like pretty deep into drugs and alcohol, like between 14, 15 years old through
Wow.
basically university. I think I finished high school with a 1.7 GPA, got into one, forgive my language, but one shitty Illinois state school
Hmm.
on academic probation. And somehow then, like over the period of 3 months, shifted gears and basically got a 4.0 GPA for like 5 semesters in a row. And I don't know what happened. I'm still trying to figure that out. I'm also not ashamed to say that I go see a therapist. And this is something that we talk about a lot. Like
Yeah.
what flipped the switch between drugs and alcohol for 5 or 6 years, like treading the line between success and failure to like going on and doing good things,
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Don't have an answer.
I love that story. I feel like I also love that you're like comfortable talking about it, which I'm sure took like a lot of work to get to the point where
Yeah.
you're talking about it. So appreciate you sharing it very,
Yeah.
very much. And yeah, I feel like obsession there. I count myself as one of these people where I get very obsessed with things, and I don't always have agency. Or actually, I would say I rarely have agency over what my current obsession is, and it can be incredibly productive and powerful and like really positive in my life, and it can also be like super negative and you know the opposite of progress, very very big drag. So I feel like really highly evolved people can recognize and somehow control, and have some agency over the thing they're obsessing over.
Mhm.
But yeah, I definitely from time to time I'm like, oh, I have a bunch of things I want to build for the community related to the courses and stuff like that. And so that's like my current obsession, just like thinking about
Mhm.
it all the time. And I think it's just like lucky. I'm like, oh, this is like a good thing to be obsessed about. It's like really productive and it's fun and it's like making me a better person. I've had phases where I was like, I had like a year-long phase where I was obsessed with Quantopian after it had closed, like what had
Mhm.
happened. I was just like totally perseverating on every single mistake that I made. It was a 10-year journey, so there were like a lot of
Oh,
mistakes to analyze, right?
but I
So
mean, it becomes a part of you, and like having done something. I mean, I ran a startup for like a year and a half, and it shut
yeah,
down, and I am still thinking about that. So I can only imagine having invested 10 years of your life into something which arguably in some aspects was a huge success, and then having that go away,
yeah.
like that takes a
It's the
lot.
going away part. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, like there's parts of it, a lot of it. I mean, overall, very grateful I got to do it, but and lots of it that I like really, really cherish. But yeah, I had to stop doing it, so that's no fun.
Yeah.
um,
I had some PTSD when Quantopian shut down.
some of the, some of the responses I've got when it came back uh really like made my decade, just like amazing statements.
Yeah, I bet.
And the other thing that's super interesting about the internet is that community is like durable. It's still there. That really surprised. I thought, because it's been 3 years, I thought it would have dissipated, but that's, with what you're doing with Piquant News and, all the content and all of the communication socially and bringing people together. Um, I think you know this already, but like that's a really durable thing that you're
Yeah.
creating, which
Well,
for me, that's like one of the key ingredients for satisfaction. Like if you make something that's going to last, right?
it's the trust, and Quantopian provided so much value to the world for nothing in return. And perhaps this was the problem with the business model. I don't know, But as a consumer of the
That
product,
part wasn't intentional. I did have plans for it to be a profitable enterprise, but you're right. It was like a one-way street there.
incredible amount of value that you provided to the community, and you earned such the durability is the trust, right? Like
Yeah.
you provide a ton of value,
Yeah.
you earn people's trust, and then that becomes a durable thing. And despite the fact that, Quantopian went away and like a very flash, like all of a sudden it was
Yeah.
there and kind of all of a sudden it wasn't,
Yeah.
but you still have that trust and that durability.
Yeah.
And you guys did it in a very, very big way.
It was a lot of fun. I think the other thing I wanted to jump back to that I think is really interesting, really resonated with me the way you phrased it was that you're on the search for complexity.
Mm.
Can you just kind of linger on that and talk about it more? Because that definitely like lit up my brain.
Yeah, there's just something about, again, I think it goes back to like my formidable years when my brain was developing. There's something about hard things that attract me. And I've noticed through time, I always go back to first principles on a lot of things. Things as simple as addition and subtraction. Like I have this aversion to just memorizing that 5 plus 5 equals 10. I have to know the underlying first principle of why 5 plus 5 equals 10. Now, that's obviously a contrived example, but that kind of feeling of going back to first principles in everything I do, it just permeates everything. And I might go back through the same options trade or the same derivation of a partial differential equation and have to go back through first principles through step one all the way through step n every single time I do the exact same problem. And it's absolutely exhausting. And I don't know, it's like some sort of tick. Like you
Mhm.
say you kind of get into this like agency-less
Yeah.
obsession. It's kind of like that. I don't have agency over my ability to control going back to these kind of first principles. And through time, it's a compounding effect. So now the stuff that I know it very, very well. And I think that's given me the confidence to go after very hard things and be able to pick them up in a quick way. So like if you present or if I read about some, like one thing I'd never really studied was copulas, right? This kind of mathematical thing, right? I have the confidence that if I went and spent a week on copulas, I would be able to know it very, very well. And having that confidence lets you go after complex things and kind of go after hard things. And now that I've been teaching quant for a year and a half to
Yeah.
over 1,000 students, like that's kind of reestablished and reaffirmed that
Hey, over
confidence.
1,000?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, man. Congratulations. That's a big
Yeah. Thank
milestone.
you. Yeah. Yeah. I hit it.
Casual,
This
casual
cohort,
1K.
this cohort, we went over, 1,000, I think
That's
1,011
awesome.
total
That's
students.
really awesome.
Thanks. Thanks. Yeah, it feels good. It's incredible to be able to do this like at the 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Time slot to put something into the world that hasn't existed before. It's
Yeah.
pretty incredible feeling. But yeah, like the whole complexity thing, that's my best explanation of how I do it. Now, why I'm attracted to it, I don't know. Probably similar reasons that you've described. You kind of get like hooked on something and
Yeah.
your brain just goes after it. I think there's probably some of that too.
Yeah, for sure. I think actually one of my personal lessons from Quantopian is I have too much of an appetite for complexity. Like I actually
Uh,
like things to be complex. I don't really know why. I haven't figured that out yet, but I definitely like it excites me like to think of like a complex idea or um like something that's a big system. I love big systems and the
mhm.
problems that emerge from them and things like that. And that is not a good not a good uh thing for businesses and products, right? Simplicity
Yeah,
is the thing you want to be after.
I'm learning that too.
Yeah.
I'm now like the whole Piquant news thing. I scaled up a lot of complexity in kind of the automation and the
Yeah.
marketing, and now I'm literally spending my time going backwards and simplifying and simplifying.
Yeah.
I think it's okay because then you know the business, you know the thing very, very well because you've made it very complex. But then it's just time that you have to spend kind of removing that complexity, making it simpler.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that's like very well invested time though,
Yeah,
because the thing about going back and taking something that's like overly complex and simplifying it, I think there's like a level of understanding that comes from that that's
yeah,
really powerful. And whatever solution you're working on, it just ends up being much more durable. In the
I
same
think
way that
so.
like a simple model holds up, like if you come up with a simpler solution, it's just way more durable.
Yeah.
One like sort of like trick that I've learned recently, you know, like especially I'm actually a little bit older, but you get to be like in your 40s and you have like a network of people and you have mentors. You kind of get to a stage where you're like, oh, if I go and ask so and so about such and such, I'm going to get this advice, because you know them well enough and you've done it enough times. And what I've learned is like I went through a phase where I thought like, well, why bother? But what I've learned is like sometimes you know the advice that you need and going to the right person. So I have a mentor who's like really passionate about simplifying things and keeping things simple. And I talk to him a lot about business ideas because I know like the advice that I need is, don't do that. It's too complicated.
Hmm.
And poor guy, because he like loves elegant and simple solutions. And I
And
think
here
it
comes
like
John.
actually, yeah, I think I actually stress him out because he really doesn't want things to be complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think like knowing the right people to go to for advice can be phenomenal. Um, Another just like quotable quote from your answer about connecting tech and trading. You said there's no better time to be alive than right now, which I think might always be true because
Yeah.
being alive is awesome.
Yeah.
But what did you mean? Like, what is it? What is it about right now that has you extra excited?
Well, I mean, I think about this a lot because I have my son who is in a great station in life, right? 5 years old in 2024, American, et cetera, et cetera. Like, got lucky. He could have been born in 1920 in Russia,
Right.
which would have been a bad outcome for him, right? So, kind of the cosmic perspective of things or the spiritual perspective of things. I think about that from the perspective of my son, being 5 years old, American, male, and it's going to sound like something that's probably politically incorrect, but the fact is, statistically speaking, he's in a great station in life. He could have been born in a different station. So I kind of think about that in perspective of what I'm doing or what technology people are doing and the access to this technology that we have. And the fact that, again, I'll just kind of reiterate that a simple tool like Pandas,
Yeah.
like the amount of leverage that you can apply to most problems with a couple lines of code with a free piece of software is
Right.
absolutely magical. And I don't want to lose sight of that because I don't want to take it for granted that we have these tools. So that on the technology side, and having worked in technology for a very long time and working at AWS, like startups are born every single day on basically zero money,
Yeah.
right? And the technology is absolutely incredible. The amount of leverage and power that you can apply to a problem to solve it for the benefit of your customers or for humanity or whatever. On the trading side, it's equally empowering to have a perspective on the market or a view on the market and be able to go express that view and get instantaneous feedback on whether you're right or not, i.e., you're making money or you're losing money. Like the money aside, I don't trade anymore for like an income. I trade because I mean I'm making money trading, but I'm trading because now of the complexity and it's an application of this technology, right? Which is probably the wrong answer. You want to trade because you want to make or lose money, but it's almost an intellectual thing at this point for me. And the ability to apply this kind of technology and having access to the markets in the way that we do, and having the ability to use Python and connect to an API and do a bunch of fancy mathematics and apply a model to the markets and then go express your view in the market is something we didn't have 5 years ago or 7 years ago or 10 years ago, right? Spreads were a quarter back in the day. You didn't have API access. You had to call your broker. So it's just a really incredible ability to have a view, have the tools to form that view, and then have the tools and the access to go express that view. If this is the sphere that you're in, and obviously Quantopian listeners are in this
This is
arena,
their, yeah.
this is their sphere, yeah. So I'm having trouble saying that word, sphere. This
But
is their realm, their domain.
yeah,
So it's a really, really absolutely incredible thing that I don't take for granted, because like I grew up in the age of modems, as you did, the 26 or 58K baud modems and the brr, 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 and all that, and like AOL, and growing up with the internet. Having the power to do this now is really amazing.
yeah, I think the one thing I would add to that is just the learning content that's out there is just amazing.
Yes.
Like you have 70 plus issues of really specific instructions on how to do, very practical things with Python for trading.
Yep.
And anybody can find it. Anybody with access to the internet can find it and take advantage of it. And to your point, replicate it, which is really, really just amazing.
And same with the Quantopian stuff. I mean, the lectures that you and the team have done over the past 15 years, it's the same. It's a master's degree. I mean, there's so much overlap between multiple courses that I took during my master's degree. A lot of the statistical stuff that you have to learn in the probability classes and the foundations of probabilities, and that's all in your lectures. And I think the challenge there, obviously, though, is putting it all together, right? And that's what the aggregators, and that's what you're doing, and that's what I'm doing. We're aggregating all this information, and we're applying it in a practical way. I think that's the struggle that people have, is like where to go, what YouTube video is correct, how do I apply this, what do I look at? A lot of it is theory. I think Quantopian does a great job of taking the theory and then showing how to apply that theory. And that's where I really try to focus, is like, I'm going to skip a lot of the theory. You can just take for granted that 2 + 2 = 4, and then just go apply it in the Python code.
Yeah, I think there's so much of a need for that last step. I think a lot of people, that's what they're in it for, right? They want to have the experience of actually doing something and then connecting to the market. I mean, there's few things more exciting than writing. Like writing software is exciting,
Yeah.
and trading is exciting. So then writing software that trades for you is very,
Nothing,
very exciting.
nothing better.
Yeah, it's super, super thrilling. Because it's got that edge of terror to
Yeah.
it. So I think people really want to get there, and it's still not the most easily trodden path, right? It's
No.
still hard, and it's extremely hard to make money doing it, which is what I think makes it all the more fun.
It's a super hard way to make money. I tell people all this time, like all the time, if you not consistently beating the SPY ETF, then give it up.
Yeah.
Go invest in SPY for 15 basis points a year and do something else.
Yeah. Yeah, the markets are incredibly efficient. The U.S. markets, anyway. I think that's like another thing I like to think about, is like, where are the inefficiencies today? What part of the system's inefficient? Because that's really there's like the application and allocation of capital, but I think the markets are also really efficient at allocating brain power. So like, being on the hunt for where there's some inefficiency is really the game, right? Is figuring that out. Do you have any theories on that? Like where it would be interesting to look for inefficiencies these days?
I think it's, I mean, as soon as you said that, I have one trade that comes to mind. I don't want to get hyper specific on a single trade, but maybe I can use it as an example. But I think like coming up with ideas for edge, it's really an art, right? There's a book on my bookshelf somewhere here called The Art of Trade, or The Laws of Trading, that I really recommend. It's this orange one here. You can't see it, but it's called The Laws of Trading, and it's by a guy who was at Jane Street for 6 years. And it's like how to think about making decisions. Like, I'm a little bit skeptical about the guy as a trader, but the book is really quite philosophical and interesting. And the way he describes thinking about edge is like, you got to tell a story. You got to come up with a story that is linked to economic reality. And I'll just use this trade that I've been looking at for a while as an example. So we have this concept of a crack spread, right? Crack spread is the difference between oil and the refined products that come out of oil. So you have a barrel of oil, you plug it into a refiner, and the refiner spits out jet fuel, heating oil, gasoline, whatever. Well, the refiner pays $80 for a barrel of oil, and the refiner sells all of these refined products for hopefully more than $80, right? And it's called the crack spread because the machine that cracks the molecule, the petroleum molecule, into these refined products is called a cracker. So there's a very well-known spread called a crack spread. And the crack spread is a proxy for a refiner's margins, right? So if the crack spread is going up, that means the difference between the price of the refined products and the crude oil is increasing. So basically, you pay X for a widget and you sell the widget for Y, okay? If that spread is increasing, then the margin, the potential margin is increasing. So if that potential margin increases, you would expect for refiners, the companies that are operating in this business, you'd expect their stock prices to increase. Well, there's lots of times where that doesn't happen. So the crack spread might be increasing, implying improved margins, but the actual price of the stock is not moving. And there's opportunity there. I'll just put it that way, that if you can find the situation where the crack spread is increasing, but the stock price is not, there's a really good opportunity to buy that stock price in anticipation of that increasing. But to bring it back, like, you have to tell yourself the story that I just told, right? So you've got a refiner, you've got a business that takes an input and pays $80 and has an output that they acquire $100 from the market. And if that spread increases, then you'd expect that stock price to increase, right? So that's just like how I'm learning how to think about the market. And that's kind of described in this book more philosophically. But it's still an interesting read that if you can kind of bear that, it's pretty dense in the language, but if you can bear that, it's a pretty good read.
Yeah, I love that. Commodities like conversion spreads on commodities are fascinating. Virtually every commodity has, like, there's the spark spread for like coal to electricity or natural gas electricity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly the same concept. So when you talk about inefficiencies, I like that inter-commodity, inter-asset concept, right? Like, there's an economic reality that's happening and exhibiting itself in this crack spread.
Yeah.
And then there's a financial market anomaly that is not being reflected in the economic reality that we're seeing. Yeah. And that's an opportunity to kind of explore. And again, going back to the technology stuff, like, you can eyeball it on a chart, or you can quantify it, back test it, and trade it on like 50 lines of code.
When you have an idea like that, do you sit down and write out the narrative? Like, do you have like a structured process for yourself when you're thinking about a trade?
It's funny. I'm actually very undisciplined in a lot of ways.
What?
Yeah, that's true. Like,
that does not track. That does not.
I know.
It's
bizarre, but like, I've tried to journal. I can't journal. I've tried to like take notes. I can't take notes. Like, I can't take notes in meetings. I just don't have the discipline to like write stuff down. I just synthesize it in my head, remember the key points, and keep moving. So I used to keep a very robust trade journal. When I was actually trading, I would write down why I entered, why I exited. I would have very specific template. At this point, it just kind of becomes intuition. So I have like a workflow that I kind of follow. Like, I tell the story, I come up with the idea, I do some very, very quick, I call it MVP, minimum viable Python. Like, what's the minimum Python you can write to like test an idea? Yep. If there's something that's like suggesting there's evidence that there's an edge there, you take it to the next step, you kind of back test it. Once you back test it, you kind of have an idea, you do the parameter testing and all these things, then you paper trade it, and then you actually live trade it. So I've got a workflow, but I don't like write down the economic rationale behind the trades.
Interesting. I guess you're codifying it, right? That but you're doing it in Python. That's what that MVP step is for you, right?
Yeah, totally.
Down to like, how am I actually going to do this?
It's like Pandas, YFinance, OpenBB, grab the data, like do a Z-score, do a percent rank. How do they track together? It's like 15, 20 lines of code. The idea is that it takes me like an hour max to kind of get an idea if there's something there. And if there's something there, you take it further. I don't want to spend 5 days like analyzing something that there's no evidence there. And you're always trying to disprove what you're seeing, right? As you probably know from your experience as well. So that's the approach.
It's always an elimination process, not a selection process.
Yeah. Well, you just get yourself into this situation where you're like confirmation bias. Like, You keep doing something until you see the answer that you want, and then you're like, oh, it works. It's like searching Google for like, does toothpaste have gluten in it? I just made that up, but like you just keep looking and looking until you find the website that has toothpaste has gluten in it, and then you're like, I told you.
I feel like you just launched like a whole segment of content marketing. Gluten-free toothpaste.
Yeah, there's a whole psychological factor there too, right?
Um, one thing that I think is really, really hard for everyone in quant finance, everyone who aspires to be in quant finance, is figuring out like what to read and what not to read. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a huge number of papers, obviously, but there's also a huge number of books.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think my personal hit rate with like, looking into or buying a book and then reading it or thinking I should have read it, I think I'm probably like 40% hit rate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's because I get advice. So, one thing that I've been trying to figure out for the Quantopian community is people really want to put effort in, but they want to be sure that they're putting effort in the right places. So,
Mm-hmm.
like when we were talking about thinking about school, I thought that was incredibly strong, but also like really practical advice about how to be deliberate and think about
Mm-hmm.
where you're going to be and what you're going to be doing, and how skills can help you win in like a couple of different outcomes instead of just one. You mentioned a couple of great books. How do you figure out what to read? Is there a place to go? Is it something like that you're working on that maybe you could help people with? Because I think people want both, right? They want like the kind of stuff that you're turning out every week that's really practical. They want grounding in fundamentals
Mm-hmm.
and statistics and things like that. So yeah, what's your solution for the what do I read problem?
Well, read my book. I'm publishing a book. You can read that. That's
Oh,
just a
that was
shameless
not
pitch.
planned. That was not planned.
I I don't know if I even told you that. It's not even out yet. So here's my kind of thought process on this, right? And it kind of depends on your age and your position in your career. When you're in your 20s, you should be in total risk on mode. And when risk on means, and I'm kind of generalizing, this assumes you have these kind of resources and you're not like, struggling. But risk on means in both time and your attention, right? So when you're in your 20s, when you're early in your career trying to figure stuff out, you should be reading everything, getting your fingers into everything, all of the things. Don't worry about wasting time. You have to be in exploratory mode. You have to, because you're trying to figure out what you want to become obsessed with. Then in like your 30s, you start to want to refine that. So when I was in my 20s, everything finance, everything trading, everything quant, it was all the papers, it was all the books, it was all the models, it was literally everything. I was obsessed with collecting academic papers. I'd read the abstract, I'd say I'm just obsessed. Then in my 30s, I kind of started to hone in on like the quant risk and the credit risk and started to kind of get into that quant risk space, started to narrow my focus in Python and like the quant stack, as I call it, and like the tooling. And now it's like just algorithmic trading. And there's a finite universe of instruments that I look at. But of all the stuff in quant, I've kind of gone through the journey over the last 20 years and I've gotten very, very specific and very, very narrow. And that's what's emerged through all
Mhm.
this exploratory stuff. So, like, as far as what to read, it kind of depends on where you're at. If you're just starting and you're later in your career and and time is a luxury for you, like let's say you and I were just getting into this, then you have to be much more intentional and much more deliberate about where you focus your attention. I would argue that it's less about like what you read than it is in what domain. So what you probably don't want to do is read everything in every domain. What you do want to do is read everything in a very, very specific domain. So if all you care about is like factor portfolio investing or like what Quantopian championed, like market neutral investing, then you better know every bloody thing there is to know about market neutral investing. All the strategies, all the techniques, all the tools, all the players, everything, if that's where you want to be. Because you can't leave stones unturned because there could be something there that would present the opportunity. If you're into machine learning, like read all of the things on machine learning that apply to the markets, right? So there's a little bit of like upfront investment in doing this thinking first. And if you're early in your career, then it's risk on. Think about everything, read about everything, figure out where you want to narrow. If you're John and Jason in your 40s and you've got kids coming in at 6:30 in the morning that burst your bubble, then you got to spend fewer minutes, but more rich minutes on very specific stuff. And last thing I'll add is like I'm at the point now where like I'm not reading about trading strategies. I'm learning about the fundamental tools I need to allow me to express my view. And I have come up with my own views. So I'm not reading about somebody else's perspective on the crack spread. I'm not reading CNBC about what they think Amazon or Nvidia is going to do. I'm looking at data and I'm reading about the tools that I need to interpret that data and to acquire that data and to make sense of that data. So I've now like gone deeper underground, if you will, to even further first principles thinking because I've already read all the things. Like there's very few authors like Rob Carver writes really great books about trading strategies. And if you're looking for ideas on trading strategies, Rob Carver has a series of books. There's another guy called Davey, I forgot his first name or last name, but he also writes about thinking about trading. There's authors that write about position management. I've read all those. I don't need another book about the Kelly criterion, but I do want to know like the mathematical fundamentals and the integrals behind the Kelly criterion, for example. And that's where I'm focusing my attention.
Can you go back and talk a little bit more about data set? Like you identify a data set and then you think about the tools you need for it. Because now, granted, I think that is like specific to like where you are in your career. I find it super interesting. So it's not the only way to go about things, but can you just talk a little bit more about it? Because I think that that's like where you want to be, right? That's where people want to grow into. So can you talk a little bit more about what that's like and how you do it?
Yeah, sure. There's this, I don't know, concept that I've heard on the internet somewhere like your opportunity surface area or your luck surface area.
Yeah.
And the more you know, the bigger the surface area is, and the more opportunities you can find as things kind of hit this net, if you will. So I know in the back of my head that I'm interested in like portfolio optimization. So I'm kind of subconsciously always on the lookout for tools that help with portfolio optimization. And through the past year or two, I've come across Riskfolio Lib, which is a library in Python that's specific to portfolio optimization. And just the last couple of weeks, I came across another one that I wrote about today in the newsletter. And I reached out to the authors of both and like we got to talking and I realized like what's happening under the hood. So now I know that, for example, the one I wrote about today was a max diversification optimization routine. So if I have a portfolio of assets and I want to maximize the diversification among that portfolio of assets, I now have a tool in my tool belt that I can do that. So instead of like worrying about what maximum diversification means, like I've already known that. It's already in my head, the routines and the mathematics behind maximal diversification of a portfolio. I don't necessarily need to revisit that. Now I'm just on the lookout for tools that let me apply that so I don't have to go write all this stuff myself. And that's kind of like, I think what I mean, like the foundation is now there. And now it's just finding how to apply apply what I know in a practical way. And this goes back to the leverage conversation with technology. It's just a couple lines of code with this new tool that lets you build these portfolios.
Yeah. And now you also have a connection with a person who's also passionate about that specific topic and
Yep.
obviously gone deep on it.
And he's happy to be exposed in Piquant News because like Piquant News is now a thing. People
Yeah.
have heard of it and know it. And I'm like, I'm the author of Piquant News. They're like, oh my God. Like, and now he's very happy to share what he knows with me, and I'm happy to share with him. And we've built this reciprocal relationship.
Yeah.
So that's kind of going back to that body of work that we talk about.
Right. And audience, I think the other thing about open source is, it's like creating open source software is a very, very creative act.
Mm-hmm.
And you need an audience. That's really like the drive is. I also think it's why open source software ends up being just like so high quality and it's
Yeah.
important. You have
Got
an
a
audience.
million people looking at it.
Yeah, and a million people whose opinion you actually care about. I
Yeah.
think you're inviting other practitioners to come in and look at your work. It's like the ultimate high scale critique.
Yeah.
Um, one kind of question as we wind down here toward the end of our time together. I'm just curious, like what you're looking forward to in the future. What are you thinking about creating? I didn't know about the book. I'm
Mhm.
interested to hear about the book. You teach classes. What's like the kind of like, I don't know about you. I always have like a what's next kind of thought in the back of my head that I'm excited about. Like, what do you think's next for you?
Yeah. Good question. I'm staying focused on the day job. Obviously, AWS is an incredible place to work. I feel very fortunate to be able to work among such high caliber people. So it's kind of like the time that I've got in the morning and then kind of the weekends, like what can I fit in here? So I'm definitely looking forward to continuing on with the Piquant new stuff. I think that's adding a lot of value to the world. I'm getting a
Yeah.
lot of enjoyment out of it. I'm learning a ton, like answering hard questions from people, and they're picking out my bugs, and like writing the newsletter like you, I get a kick out of writing. I think it's a
Yeah.
very clear form of thinking. I'm starting a new project with a partner called Quant Science as well. This is very, very focused on algorithmic trading. So PyQuant is tilted towards the tooling,
Yep.
pretty broad, pretty deep, in a pretty wide range of things across like the kind of roughly investing landscape. The quant science piece is like one thing, algorithmic trading, that's it, super deep.
Okay.
So I'm definitely looking forward to building that, and just like keep on keeping on. I'm kind of like trying to unwind that what's next. I've been on the what's next train for like 25 years,
Yeah.
and if you actually sit back and think of what you've got, you're like, wow, I've got a lot. I've got things going pretty well. So I'm trying to like stop chasing the shiny ball, if you will. So I think the focus will be on the AWS piece, the PyQuant stuff, and this quant science thing throughout the next year or two.
When can you come back and tell us about quant science?
I can tell you about it right now if you want to hear about it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'd love to hear what it's going to be.
Cool. So we launched a cohort in December, and quant science was, here's 3 trading strategies. Here's the code to trade them. Here's a Discord channel. Here's 3 or 4 live clinics where I go very deep into trading strategy 1, 2, and 3. We go very deep in backtesting. We go very deep in risk and performance management. And basically, students walk away with 3 systems that are literally putting orders into a paper trading account in Interactive Brokers. We're evolving that, basically expanding that to the same kind of core concept, but my partner is a machine learning data scientist. And he's in the creator space. He's been doing data science for like 15 or 20 years. So we're taking the angle of applying machine learning to like factor development and portfolio management and kind of statistical analysis on these systems. And the idea here is like, we think algorithmic trading as a discipline is inaccessible. It's too hard, right? Quantopian made massive leaps to get people there, but there's still more to go, right? So what we're trying to do is educate people that trading is not 50-day moving average strategies. Modern trading, hobbyist traders, retail traders can absolutely get involved in algorithmic trading, and we're giving people the tools to do it in quant science.
Actually, here's a question that I think will be a great close.
Yeah.
What is your definition of algorithmic trading? What does that mean for you?
I have a slide actually that I define it, but basically it's using computers to tell you when you should buy or sell because something is undervalued.
Is it also telling you like which asset to buy or sell, or is it like it? I guess the root of my question is, do you consider it to be like a way of approaching entry and exit for a single security, or is it more cross-sectional?
It's a great question. The way I see algorithmic trading is it's like using a static like input output that
Mhm.
makes trading decisions, that generates trading signals. So how do you put stuff into a function and that function gives you a buy or sell? It tells you what to do. That could be cross-sectional across assets. That could be like, I mean, spread trading and pairs trading, et cetera. it could be super low frequency too. Like I consider a monthly portfolio rebalancing strategy as algorithmic trading, because you're doing that with computer systems and you're putting those trades into the book with a computer. It's pretty broad, and it's a good question because it's kind of hard to define, but that's like my synthesis. It's hard to define it in a single sentence, I would say. But
like
I
it.
think,
Yeah, I like the idea of like data in, trades out. It's like
yeah,
a transform function for data to trades. That definitely resonates because
yeah,
that's a very inclusive definition.
yeah,
Which is
means a
cool.
lot. Means a
Yeah,
lot of means a lot of stuff.
yeah. Um, this was so fun. I wish we had like another
Yeah,
2 hours.
yeah, me too. I love it.
So I hope that we can do this again sometime, and I can't wait to see the book, and I'm sure everybody in the Quantopian community will be excited about it. We actually are doing like a book club, just like
Oh,
live get together and having people come and lead a discussion for books. So when your book drops, let's talk, and maybe we can do that. Have like a book club reading for your.
I love that. Zipline features heavily in the book.
Does it?
It does. Yeah, the book is Algorithmic Trading with Python. That's the book. And there's a couple chapters where I'm walking through the backtesting process using the pipeline API. I'm still a huge fanboy of Zipline. I teach Zipline in my course.
Zipline was the team behind Zipline was amazing.
Yeah.
Really, really strong individuals, but also the way they came together for Zipline was amazing. And Pipeline was built when Quantopian was pretty large, so we had a large audience, and it was some of the best like API product management that I've ever witnessed, where there was the engineering and product management worked to come up with the interface design, and then they tested it by having people basically pseudocode with the interface.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a lot of repetitions of that, and it's pretty amazing like how much it improved the design of the interface. And then because we had really strong engineering team, the implementation is lights out. I know you've told me that you've read the whole implementation a few times.
I've gone through that line by line with the debugger
Yeah,
like more times than I can count. It's some of the best Python software engineering to this day I've ever seen. And I've learned so much from the code base. It's absolutely incredible.
yeah, yeah. It'd actually be fun to do like a deep dive into the Zipline implementation, talk about
Yeah.
all the choices.
Grab your lead engineer. I actually like went through and implemented options backtesting in Zipline. So you guys had just been talking about
Yeah,
futures,
yeah,
and it's actually on my GitHub. Like I didn't do anything with it. I got it to work and then I stopped using it, but it's there. And so I had gone through Zipline in the debugger line by line, like so many times that I can't count. Super impressed. Like if you're listening and you're on that team, amazing, absolutely incredible.
amazing work. All right, man.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Like this was a great couple hours, and I can't wait to get this out to everybody to listen in.
Yeah. Thanks for
And
the invite. I
let's
can't
get
believe I'm talking to the Quantopian guy. It's still kind of surreal. I was talking to my wife about this yesterday. It's still surreal to me.
there's
Love
like
it.
3 or 4 people in the world who would feel that way.
Well, I'm one of them.
Nice.
Yeah, it's been a
All right.
pleasure. I'll see you in March, man.
Yeah, see you in New York.
Okay.
All right.
Cheers. Take care.
Be good.